Thank you for joining us. We're here on a Monday morning to discuss the budget, the governor's budget proposal, specifically having to do with education. You know, budgets here in Albany are about setting priorities. And the governor has sent a clear message to everyone in New York State, every teacher, every parent, and most importantly, every child, that their education is not a priority to her. She's cut spending to education by over $400 million. In my district alone, it's $5.2 million. There isn't a single school district in my district that isn't seeing a cut at a time when our children are still recovering from the impacts of COVID, from being outside of schools, and we all understand that there is a significant impact to our children from those 2 years that they'll never get back. And so the idea that somehow we are going to devalue their education by removing funds from our school districts that are critically important to giving them a part of those 2 years back is something that we can't acknowledge. And frankly, it's up to the governor and the majorities in this legislature to speak to why they would allow that to happen. Now, the governor talks about smoothing, and that in this case, there are school districts that have had a loss in funding for children and what we've called hold harmless. But folks, I'll tell you, in my districts, those numbers fluctuate from year to year. The whole idea of hold harmless was to create stability in our school districts and allow school districts the ability to fund year over year. So these choices that are made to defund schools because they've lost a handful of students only to give them more next year when those students return is absurd. We recognize that as a result of hold harmless, we provide stability in education funding, and it's critically important that we continue to do that. Now, you're going to hear from a number of my colleagues today with regard to certain proposals, but it should not be lost on anyone today that the governor's budget proposal prioritizes things other than education. At a time when she's cutting education for our children, she's prioritizing spending $2.4 billion on a self-created migrant crisis. The residents of my district and residents across this state did not vote for New York State to be a sanctuary state. They did not vote for New York City to be a sanctuary city. They didn't vote to have undocumented immigrants come into our country and take over resources that were meant for our communities, and most importantly, in this case, for our children and our schools. And yet here we are. $2.4 billion, $500 million more over last year, and yet we're losing $412 million in our schools cumulatively. Now, there isn't a single school district or Senate district in this state that isn't impacted other than those that are in the Big Five. New York City seeing an increase, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and Yonkers as well. And so, again, the governor's prioritizing urban districts over suburban and rural districts, and it has to stop. Now, there are a couple of options that we can talk about. One of those is looking at the per pupil funding that has remained constant since the formula was first developed. It's $500 per student, and it's been $500 per student for at least the last 15 years, if not longer. That needs to be adjusted, and at a time, if you go back and look, that education spending in this state has increased, either doubled or tripled over those 15 years. That $500 per student reimbursement rate remains constant, and that has to change. Two, there are districts that we have throughout this state that receive funding from New York State, some 5.5% of their entire state funding, of their entire school budget funding. We would propose, and we're working on legislation that would create a floor of 20%. There is no school district in this state that should receive less than 20% of their funding for their entire budget in light of state education department mandates and requirements from this state. I have a school district in my district that receives 5%. 95% of school funding comes on the backs of taxpayers, and they're about to lose about $800,000 year over year. So I'll ask you, because they're asking me, at a time when they are losing $800,000 and they only receive 5% of their overall funding from the state, where are they supposed to get that? How are they going to keep teachers employed and keep those children educated? Because we're not cutting fat, folks. We're cutting bone. And the governor knows that. And so I think you're going to hear loud and clear today from my colleagues and certainly from me, enough is enough. We're going to prioritize our children. And with that, I want to take the opportunity to recognize my dear friend, the ranker on our Senate Education Committee, person who is no stranger to education, professionally, a teacher, and a wonderful member of this conference and of this Senate and of the Assembly before that. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Jim Tedesco.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. As the ranking member on the Senate Education Committee, I represent our conference and our leader, Senator Ort, along with fellow colleagues, Senator Wake, Senator Weber, Senator Oberacker, and Senator Steck. And I can assure you, each one of my colleagues behind me and in this conference, led by our leader, Senator Ort, has some serious concerns about the dastardly impact of this budget that Governor Hochul has presented to us, and its profound impacts on our kids, on our schools, on the priority of what we say we believe education is, on our local taxpayers. Each one individually behind me has their own individual concerns holistically and individually in their district. This is a budget that increases spending by $4 billion, $233.4 billion budget in total, has a deficit looming with it of $4.3 billion, and this governor has decided, as has been mentioned, to put $2.4 billion in there for a program that is failing us drastically, which deals with illegal migrants, in the philosophy of not developing a plan for a simulation to bring them into this nation and lead them to become citizens and be a part of this American dream. No, give them all the benefits we can possibly give them. Do not lead them to become citizens, and make sure they vote. Well, guess what? They tried that in New York City, and they did vote. Then they brought it to court, and it was unconstitutional because they believe, the courts, you can't vote. That's not a right when you're not a citizen. Now, having said that we have our own individual concerns, let me say this directly and succinctly. This conference, under the leadership of Senator Ort, is not going to go quietly into the night, allowing this budget, this governor, all the levers of power here to balance this terrible budget on the backs of our kids, our educational system, and backslide more from the progress we made because of decisions they made. It wasn't just because we had COVID. It was them saying, we're going to put kids in their kitchen, in front of a computer screen, and miles away are going to be teachers in front of another computer screen, and it's going to work out well. Well, it didn't work out well. It failed miserably. This budget is going to bring them back even farther negative direction with educational development. It's just a fact. Now, we are all public servants. We're all senators. We're all elected officials. But most importantly, we're representatives. We listen to our constituents. You know what our constituents say about education? Every poll I've seen, I've done them myself, the media's done, they appreciate it. It's a top priority. When we say, do you want to fund it? Absolutely, fund education. But there's two caveats. Can you make the scores improve and help the kids get better scores, better graduation rates? And by the way, Don't take them out of a classroom and put those who have come here illegally, illegals, and do what you did during COVID. They know that has been a failure right now. And they also say this: don't use immigration as a political tool. Don't provide a process that says you're going to spend millions and billions of dollars to use them as pawns on a chessboard to just kick the can down the road when they come in here, and to really not solve a problem in any way, but to exacerbate the problem. Then to pour salt in the wounds. Please don't go out to Washington anymore. Talk to the President of the United States. Talk to our senators and our congresspeople out there. And as a byproduct, say, do something about the border, but give us billions of dollars more so we can rent more buses, put more families and young children on buses, bring them to upstate and across this state, have them add to what the school board members have done to create the budget that costs $26,000 per student, the highest per capita per student, and then don't provide any assistance for those who, well, 2/3 in a district close to mine in Mohoddison use English as a second language. So now they have to hire teachers, special education instructors. It's failing miserably, that concept. And the hypocrisy is really dripping. You can't get around the fact that the mayor of New York City, the governor, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle beat the drum every single day, and they're still doing it. Come one, come all. When they come, not so much. Not so much anymore. We have an obligation to let them know that this is a priority. And when I look at this budget, as you know, I've called it the hocus pocus. She doesn't have a magic wand. She doesn't have the sleight of hand of a Houdini. She's not going to pull a rabbit out of a hat with the spending process she's put in place, with the priorities she's put in place right now. We're going to backslide more, and in order to catch up in the future, really have to spend a lot more money to get our kids to a place that they deserve in terms of the educational development they have lost. Now, I like to say on occasion, tongue-in-cheek, as Senator Martin said, I had a real job at one time. I was an educator for 10 years. Taught kids with learning disabilities, challenges. And if you're a teacher in a classroom, you can understand why it becomes difficult for kids to understand the curriculum we're dealing with. Parents want good curriculum, they want great teachers, they want great facilities. If they have a toxic environment outside or a toxic environment within the school, and sometimes we do. And when we talk about funding and a lack of funding, we have high-need, low-wealth districts. They're not being taken care of now. Hold harmless. They're losing money right now. We all agreed we want to go forward. This went to court. We were behind what the Constitution said. We caught up, and now we're backsliding right now. But the most important part of all of this, kids may come to school hungry, difficult environments, is the funding and making sure if actions take place at a school and bullying takes place, that we just don't have a law that says you're going to have to contact the state education committee and let them know the impact of this particular incident. Without a law that was within that notifies the people who are asking, the parents, the people who pay the bills, we're asking them to come and assist and volunteer in PTA meetings and meet with their teachers, but we don't notify them when their child is being bullied, when their heads are being slammed into lockers. So we're not providing the funding, extremely important. We want parents to do a lot more, but we don't let them know and be a part of the mitigation in the plan to protect their children when they're being bullied in school. And that's a bill I have right now because of a boy named Jacob Terrace. You know about that. Jacob Terrace was being bullied in school and his parents never knew about it. And he took a gun and took his life. So there's a whole variety of ways we're failing our educational system and our parents. And I'll close the way I started. We're not going to go quietly in the night, allowing them to place a budget that is balanced on the backs of the future of our kids, of their education, which is so important, and with the cost of their taxpayers. This conference will not do that. At this point, I'd like to present to you Senator Wyke to say a few words.
Thank you, Senator Tedisco, and those are great inputs. And this year, we all saw the governor's budget proposal cuts $420 million from foundation aid for our schools, leaving some of our schools in the position to have to cut teachers, staff, or programs. Yet her proposal includes setting aside $2.4 billion for illegal migrants. Our tax dollars supporting a crisis we don't support. 56 schools on Long Island are suffering a cut, huge cuts, a total of $43 million. The state has a constitutional obligation to fund a sound, basic education to the legal residents of New York State. Educating our children should be a priority. It should be the governor's priority to fund and provide for the tax-paying families of the state she swore an oath to serve. Housing illegal migrants in our schools, even for a day, is not okay. Students should not miss one day of education just because the state lured migrants who entered our country illegally and have no place to stay. I have a bill that would prevent disruption to our K-12 classrooms, keeping students on track and making them our first priority. Last year, the governor and the Democrat majority boasted time and time again that for the first time ever, they fully funded foundation aid, and this year should be no different. The governor and the Democrat majority need to reallocate that $2.4 billion to our students, our schools, and our programs, and support the taxpayers of this state. And we're here today to make sure that that gets done. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague who I know also supports so many schools in his district, Senator Peter Oberacher.
Thank you, Senator Wyke, and good afternoon, everybody. You know, from the moment the governor's budget, her presentation took place, I've heard from plenty of individuals and concerned groups about the spending proposal. By far, the leading complaints have come from school superintendents and concerned parents. You know, I represent 50 school districts across my 7-county district, second largest Senate district in New York. A vast majority of these schools can be classified as low wealth and high need. When superintendents at these schools saw that their projected aid numbers were going down, they took notice, and my phone has not stopped ringing since. This is not whether these schools can offer a third or fourth language or some elective or some club activity. This is about whether they can keep the lights on. These districts depend on the state support. The governor's talked a lot about affordability and the need for housing. Well, by cutting aid, property taxes are going to be going up in the areas that cannot afford to take the hit. Think about that. Cause and effect. And more people will be packing up and leaving our state than ever before. And this is not how to increase affordability, although I guess it could ease some of the housing crunch. Not a result any of us want. So we need to take steps to reduce the mandates of our schools and the ones they are already facing. And we need to ensure that our schools, all of our schools, are receiving their fair share of school aid. Students statewide should have access to a quality education that prepares them to move forward in life regardless of where they live, whether it be a rural or urban district. Another key area, student safety. I have schools throughout my 7-county district who want to take steps to increase the safety. And one of the best ways to accomplish this is to take preventative steps that include adding school resource officers to our buildings. That's why I sponsored legislation that would allow school districts to receive state aid to hire qualified individuals who help keep our schools safe. My bill, Senate Bill 4985. This bill would also ensure that retired police officers can be hired without affecting their benefits, which is a huge, huge issue. This is a group of men and women who are qualified and want to make their service available. Folks, we have a long way to go to get to the state budget that will truly meet the needs of those I represent. Education and school safety cannot be shortchanged. And I'm looking forward to Thursday's education budget hearing and the opportunity to press our state officials on these and other topics that truly make a difference in our schools. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and with that, I would like to turn this back over to our leader for today, Senator Martins.
Thank you, Senator Oberacher. Well said. Look, it's simple. The governor says she's increasing spending to education by $800 million. False. She's shortchanging our schools to the tune of $420 million, and that is shifting money from suburban and rural schools that cannot afford a cut, taxpayers that cannot afford to continuously pay more and more in property taxes to support a system that has frankly failed them. And so we have an opportunity this year, if she wants to have a discussion. But when CPI is going up and the cost of living for everything across the state, and we know this has gone up, the idea that in a tax cap world we're going to limit our schools and their aid and force them to absorb that is something we will not stand for. We'll stand with our parents, our teachers, and most importantly, our children in fighting. And we're looking forward to, as Senator Oberacher said, our discussion on Thursday during our hearing and throughout this budget process. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.